The light rain fell over the busy streets of New York, painting the sidewalk in dark tones as the car lights reflected on the wet asphalt. People hurried by, shielding themselves under umbrellas or lowering their heads against the cold wind. It was one of those typical days when no one looked to the sides. Everyone focused only on moving forward with their lives, indifferent to whoever or whatever was around them. Michael Carter, a renowned businessman in the investment sector, walked toward the entrance of a gleaming glass building, firmly holding his phone while speaking to his assistant. He was the kind of man who drew attention wherever he went, tall, well-dressed, with an ever-determined gaze. His name frequently appeared in financial magazines and business columns. Anyone working in the industry knew who he was. He was typing something quickly on the screen when his eyes caught a scene that made him stop mid-step. Near the building's entrance, a woman sat on the ground, huddled against the wall, holding two small children. Her clothes were dirty, her hair disheveled, and her eyes, despite being exhausted, carried an unmistakable glimmer of despair. The children, a boy and a girl, both seemingly under 6 years old, were clinging to her, shielding themselves from the biting wind. Something about her posture, the way she held her children, sent a chill down Michael's spine. He knew that woman. It couldn't be a coincidence. His eyes scanned her features once more, and then his heart pounded. "Emma?" he murmured, almost voiceless. The woman lifted her face, her eyes widening for a brief moment before quickly lowering them, as if trying to hide in shame. Michael felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Emma Collins, the woman he never thought he would see again. The woman who had once been an important part of his life. Without hesitation, he crossed the sidewalk and knelt in front of her, completely ignoring the curious glances around him. "Emma, my God, what happened to you?" She remained silent, clutching her children closer, as if afraid someone might take them from her arms. The little girl looked at him with big brown eyes, the same eyes Emma had when she was younger. Michael swallowed hard, trying to organize his thoughts. He remembered Emma as a vibrant, lively woman. They had studied together at Harvard Business School, and for a brief time had been involved in an intense, almost perfect relationship. But something had happened between them, and she had vanished completely from his life without a trace. Now, seeing her in this devastating situation was a shock he couldn't process. "Emma, please tell me what's going on. Do you need help?" She took a deep breath, as if struggling against a lump in her throat, and finally found the courage to speak. "Michael, her voice faltered, and she looked at her children before continuing. "I didn't want you to see me like this." Michael ran a hand over his face, trying to suppress the flood of questions rushing through his mind. "Let me help you. You can't stay out here on the street with these children. Come with me." Emma hesitated, her gaze shifting from her children to Michael. He could see the conflict in her eyes. "I can't. She paused, as if searching for the right words. "It's not that simple." Michael frowned. What could be so complicated that it stopped her from accepting help? "Emma, please. Let's at least get off the street and find a warm place. You need food. The children need food." Her hesitation lasted only a few more seconds before a gust of cold wind made the children curl up even tighter against her chest. Finally, she nodded. Michael quickly stood and extended his hand to her. Emma held onto her children tightly and accepted his help to stand up. She limped slightly, as if injured, making Michael's concern deepen. He called his driver, who pulled up quickly at the curb. "We're going to my apartment," he said, opening the car door for her. Emma looked at him uncertainly, but given the situation, she had no other choice. She got into the car, settling the children beside her. During the ride, silence filled the vehicle. Michael didn't want to pressure her, but his mind was racing with questions. How had a woman so brilliant and full of potential ended up like this? What had happened for Emma to end up living on the streets with two small children? When they arrived at Michael's apartment building, he led Emma and the children inside the luxurious space, a complete contrast to what she had grown accustomed to lately. The living room was spacious, with glass windows offering a spectacular view of the city. But Emma didn't seem impressed. Her expression was empty, as if the beauty of the place meant nothing to her. Michael noticed her discomfort and tried to ease it. "I'll order food for you." You need to warm up. Emma simply nodded. The children looked exhausted and hungry. While waiting for the food, Michael finally broke the silence. Emma, I need to understand. How did you end up like this? What happened after you disappeared? She lowered her head, gripping her hands tightly. It's a long story, Michael. A story I don't know if I want to relive. He took a deep breath. I'm not here to judge, Emma. I just want to understand. She lifted her eyes to him, and for the first time since they had reunited, Michael saw something different in her expression. A deep fear, a secret that seemed too heavy for her to carry alone. Emma took a deep breath and began to speak. After I left college, I made bad choices. I trusted the wrong people. And everything fell apart. Michael remained silent, waiting for her to continue. I got married, Michael. I thought I was doing the right thing, but the man I married, he wasn't who I thought he was. Michael felt a chill run through his body. Who was he, Emma? She hesitated for a moment before whispering, someone very dangerous. The tension in the air thickened. Michael knew at that moment that Emma's story was far darker than he had ever imagined. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Michael kept his eyes fixed on Emma, trying to decipher the storm of emotions she seemed to be fighting. The children had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted, and now, without their distraction, there was no way to avoid the conversation. Someone very dangerous? Michael repeated carefully, as if stepping onto a minefield. Emma, you need to tell me everything. Who was he? She clasped her hands in her lap, her fingers intertwined so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to dive into memories she preferred to forget. His name was Richard. Michael narrowed his eyes. The name meant nothing to him, but the way Emma said it, with a mix of fear and disgust, was enough to send a chill down his spine. I met him shortly after leaving college, she continued. At the time, I was alone, trying to establish myself. I had no family to support me, and things started falling apart too fast. He appeared at the exact moment I needed someone. He was charming, persuasive, and he knew exactly what to say to make me believe everything would be okay. Michael watched every expression on her face, every subtle change in her posture. At first, it seemed like a dream. Emma forced a weak smile, which disappeared almost instantly. He was a businessman, always talking about investments, money, security. He promised me a comfortable life, a stable future. Michael felt a surge of anger rise inside him. He knew men like that, wolves in sheep's clothing. And when did things change? He asked. Emma lowered her eyes, absent-mindedly tugging at the hem of her worn-out blouse. Soon after we got married, her voice was barely a whisper. At first it was small things. He started controlling how I dressed, who I talked to. Then he began monitoring my calls, my social media. He said it was for my protection. Michael clenched his fists. He could already see where this was going. And then came the violence, Emma continued, her voice breaking at the end of the sentence. Michael held his breath. He never hit me where it would leave visible marks. She looked at him, her eyes filled with pain. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was the manipulation. He made me feel like I had no way out, like I wouldn't survive without him. Michael felt bitterness rise in his throat. And how did you get out? Emma hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly. I found out I was pregnant. Michael blinked, processing the information. His gaze drifted to the sleeping children on the couch. They're his kids? He asked, his voice quieter now. Emma nodded slowly. When I found out, I thought things would get better. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would change. But he didn't. It got worse. He became even more obsessive, more controlling. And then, when my daughter was born, she paused, her breathing uneven. I knew I had to get out, before it was too late. Michael felt a weight settle in his chest. He couldn't even imagine what Emma had gone through. Was it easy to leave? She laughed, a laugh devoid of humor. Nothing was easy, Michael. I tried to run away multiple times. He always found me. He told me I would never escape him, that if I tried again, he would take the kids away from me. Michael clenched his teeth, his anger now boiling inside him. But you made it. Emma nodded. It took me almost 2 years to find the right moment. But when I did, I ran away with nothing but the clothes on my back and a few crumpled bills in my pocket. Since then, I've been living in the shadows, hiding from him. Always afraid he would find us. Michael felt his heart tighten. Is he still looking for you? Emma hesitated for a moment before answering. Always. Her voice was barely audible. Michael took a deep breath, trying to contain the wave of fury rising inside him. You don't have to live like this anymore, Emma. His voice was firm now. I'm going to help you. Emma looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. Michael, you don't understand. He's powerful. He has contacts everywhere. If he finds out I'm here, he'll come after me. And if he discovers you're helping me, he'll come after you too. Michael leaned forward, gripping her hand firmly. Let him try. Emma stared at him, surprised by the intensity of his words. I'm not the college kid you once knew, Emma. I have resources, influence. He might be powerful, but so am I. She shook her head. I don't want to put you in danger. Michael gently cupped her face, making her look directly at him. You're already in danger, Emma, and I won't turn my back on you. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back her emotions. When she opened them again, there was something different in them, a spark of hope. Michael knew that this battle was only beginning, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let Emma face it alone. The silence that filled the apartment was thick and heavy with emotions. Emma averted her gaze, her hand still trembling slightly in her lap. Michael could see that even with the small glimmer of hope that had emerged, fear was still deeply ingrained in her. He didn't blame her. After everything he had heard, he knew the situation was far more dangerous than he had initially imagined. He got up and walked over to the window, looking out at the illuminated city below. New York always seemed vibrant, full of life, indifferent to the dramas and tragedies unfolding inside luxurious apartments or on the cold sidewalks. Emma, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with, he said, turning to face her. This Richard, who is he really? She ran a hand over her face as if trying to push away a thought that haunted her. Richard Parker, she whispered. He owns a network of companies that serve as a front for much darker businesses, human trafficking, money laundering, even connections to organized crime. But he's always known how to hide it well. On paper, he's just another successful investor. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Richard Parker. The name wasn't unfamiliar. He had heard it in meetings, in hushed conversations within the business world, but always as a respected, influential figure. If even half of what Emma was saying was true, then he was dealing with a far more dangerous opponent than he had anticipated. And you're certain he's still looking for you? Emma let out a bitter, lifeless laugh. Michael, I receive anonymous messages at least once a week. Sometimes they're just short warnings, reminders that he's close. Other times they're photographs of me, taken from a distance, as if to remind me that I'm never truly hidden. Michael clenched his fists. The thought of someone watching Emma and the children like that made his blood boil. And you never went to the police? Emma looked at him as if he had just suggested something ridiculous. Do you think a man like Richard doesn't have influence over the authorities? I tried, Michael. I went to a police station months after I escaped. I told them everything. Filed a report. She took a deep breath. 2 weeks later, one of the officers who assisted me turned up dead. The news reported it as a mugging, but I knew the truth. It was a warning. Michael stood in silence for a few seconds, absorbing every word. He needed to be smart. Richard wasn't a typical adversary. Emma, you can't keep running. This isn't a life for you or your children. She bit her lower lip, visibly torn. I know. But what else can I do? I tried disappearing. I changed my name, moved to different cities. But every time I thought I was safe, something happened. He always finds me. Michael pulled up a chair and sat down in front of her, his gaze locked onto hers. This time, you're not alone. Emma hesitated. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in Michael's strength, but years of living in fear and constantly looking over her shoulder had taught her to distrust everything and everyone. What are you planning to do? Michael took a deep breath. He knew that any wrong move could put Emma and the children in even greater danger, but he also knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. First, we make sure you're safe. I'm going to assign security to you and the kids 24 hours a day. No matter where you go, they'll be there. Emma frowned. And then? Michael hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to scare her with what he was truly planning, but there was no other way. I'm going to take Richard down. Emma's eyes widened. Michael, this is dangerous. You have no idea what he's capable of. He leaned forward, his expression unwavering. And you have no idea what I'm capable of. She stared at him, studying his face. Michael Carter wasn't just any businessman. He had built his empire through determination and intelligence. If there was one thing he had learned in the business world, it was that every man had a weakness, and he would find Richard's. But how? Emma asked, clearly worried. Michael pulled out his phone and quickly typed a message, sending it before looking back at her. I know the right people. I have contacts who can dig up information that even Richard can't hide. We'll start there. Emma still seemed skeptical, but there was something about Michael's posture that made her believe, even if only for a moment, that maybe there was a chance. Suddenly the intercom buzzed. Michael frowned and went to answer it. Yes? The voice of the building's doorman came through the speaker. Mr. Carter, there's a man at the reception asking to speak with Miss Collins. Michael exchanged a quick glance with Emma. The instant panic on her face was enough for him to understand what was happening. Did he give his name? No, sir. He just said he needs to see her urgently. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She grabbed Michael's arm, her eyes wide with terror. Michael, it's him. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling his anger boil over. Richard Parker was here. Tell him she's not here. Michael's voice was firm, controlled. Understood, sir. Michael hung up and turned to Emma. He's already found us. She covered her mouth with both hands, trying to suppress the tremor in her body. Michael knew there was no more time for elaborate plans. The war had begun, and he wasn't going to lose. The silence that followed the call was thick and suffocating. Emma instinctively shrank back, her wide eyes locked onto Michael, who was now pacing back and forth across the apartment, his jaw clenched with tension. Richard Parker was downstairs. He had found them. Michael's mind raced. If Richard knew Emma was here, it meant they had been watched for far longer than they had realized. This wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of war. Emma pushed herself up from the couch, her entire body trembling. Michael, he's going to get in. He always gets what he wants. Michael stopped walking and gripped her shoulders firmly, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Not this time. She blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. You don't understand. He has men. He has contacts. He can pay anyone to do whatever he wants. This building might have security, but that means nothing to him. He's bought people before. Michael narrowed his eyes, absorbing every word she said. If he thinks he can intimidate me, then he's underestimated the wrong man. Emma wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in Michael's strength, but panic was deeply embedded in her. The intercom buzzed again. Michael exhaled sharply before answering. Mr. Carter, the man insists. He says he knows Miss Collins is here. He wants to see her now. Michael exchanged a quick glance with Emma. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with fear. Then, Michael did something that completely shocked her. Tell him I'm coming down. Her eyes widened as she grabbed his arm tightly. What? You can't? Michael ended the call and turned to her, his expression serious and unwavering. If he wants a meeting, he's going to get one. But it won't go the way he expects. Emma shook her head frantically. Michael, Please. He's not a man you can negotiate with. Michael pulled out his phone and quickly sent a message before looking back at her. I'm not going to negotiate. I'm going to show him that you're not alone anymore. She opened her mouth to argue but found no words. Michael stepped closer and cupped her face gently, making her look at him. Trust me. Emma felt a lump in her throat. No one had ever fought for her before. She had always been alone. But now, for the first time in years, someone was willing to stand up to Richard for her. Michael pulled away, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the apartment with determined steps. Inside the elevator, his heart pounded. He wasn't a man who was easily intimidated. In business, he had faced ruthless investors, sharks, men who tried to crush him. But nothing compared to this. When the elevator doors slid open on the ground floor, Michael immediately spotted Richard Parker standing in the lobby. Tall, impeccably dressed, exuding an air of superiority carved into every feature of his face. His tailored suit was flawless, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Richard smiled as Michael approached. Michael Carter. He extended his hand as if they were about to finalize a business deal. We finally meet. Michael ignored the gesture. If you came here for Emma, you're wasting your time. Richard's smile remained, but his eyes narrowed slightly. You speak as if you have a choice in this. Michael crossed his arms. You might be used to scaring people, Parker, but I'm not one of your frightened employees. Emma is under my protection now, and if you even think about getting near her again, I swear I'll destroy you. Richard let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Do you really think you can threaten me? He stepped closer. You're just another wealthy businessman. I deal with men like you every day. Men who think money and influence are everything, but you don't understand the depth of what you're up against. Michael didn't flinch. And you don't understand who I am. Richard studied him for a moment. Then, he gave a small, knowing smile and tilted his head slightly. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. He turned to leave but paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. Tell Emma I said hello. Michael felt his fists tighten, but he remained still, controlling his fury. He knew exactly what Richard was doing, trying to provoke him, to throw him off balance. But he wouldn't take the bait. As soon as Richard stepped outside, Michael grabbed his phone and made a call. I want a full report on Richard Parker. Contacts, business dealings, financial movements, everything, and I want it now. A voice on the other end responded immediately. Understood, Mr. Carter. Michael hung up and took a deep breath before heading back upstairs. When he entered the apartment, he found Emma standing by the window, hugging her arms around herself, her face pale. He's gone, Michael said softly. She turned to him, her eyes still filled with fear. For now. Michael walked up to her and gently took her hands. We're going to take him down, Emma, I promise you. She searched his face for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. He was completely serious. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, but then slowly she nodded. And in her eyes, for the first time, there was more than just fear. There was hope. The game had begun, and Michael Carter was determined to win.